Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexandra Palmer. I'm the Nora Ebon Senior Curator in Global Fashions and Textiles here at the Royal Ontario Museum. I'm delighted you could join us today for today's Curator Conversation, a digital program that explores themes and subjects from the ROM collections alongside industry professionals. And I'd like to especially thank our partner today, Fashion Art Toronto, for their support in helping present today's program. First of all, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the ROM sits on what has been the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe Nation, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, since time immemorial to today. So my guest for today's program is Toronto-based fashion insider Sarah J. And today is an important conversation that addresses two of ROM's initiatives, global fashion and textiles, as well as climate change. And climate change has been made possible by the visionary support of donors Alan and Helene Schiff, and ROM's inaugural curator of climate change is named Dr. Soren Brothers, and he is leading an interdisciplinary climate change initiative focused on public programming and citizen engagement. And you'll be hearing a lot more about this as things roll out over the years. My own work within global fashion and textiles explores the impact of fashion production and consumption across time, and particularly nowadays, the imperative of addressing the issues that we have with climate change and fashion as an accelerator, particularly the effects of fast fashion. We are urgently in need of sustainable choices and legislation, as well as information to assist us and give us confidence in our shopping decisions and in what we're doing. And this is what we're trying to do today, to help you work out what might be a better alternative. So our guest today is Sarah J., who has over 18 years of experience in all areas of fashion media. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Her styling has been featured in magazines including Fashion, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, and Elle, and her television credits include Canada's Next Top Model, Eat Yourself Sexy, Look Alike, and Project Runway Canada. She's an advocate for change and has worked with Fashion Takes Action, Canada's only apparel non-profit focused group that focuses on sustainability. She served as a cabinet member on Environmental Defence's Just Beautiful campaign and conceived and produced the documentary Toxic Beauty, which we'll talk about later along with a lot of these things, which is a feature documentary addressing the lack of legislation or regulation and the problems of the cosmetic industry and the human health impacts of toxin exposure, as well as a founder of All Earthlings. So she's a busy lady. We'll have time for some of your questions at the end. So please put them in the Q&A feature, not the chat, and then we'll get back to you at the end. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So this is Sarah as a stylist. And first of all, I'd like you to give us a brief introduction to yourself and your trajectory into fashion, and how you got started and what it's led you to, which is a quite a squiggly path.
It's true. I began my career in fashion as an intern at Fashion Magazine. I sort of didn't plan on pursuing fashion growing up. I grew up in a small town where definitely I believed that fashion happened only in New York, Paris, and other major cities. So I was thrilled and inspired when I moved to Toronto and realized that the Fashion Magazine offices were close to my house. And that internship really opened me up and put me on the path that I'm still on today.
So you're really known as a stylist, and we have some slides here that show some of your real variety of your work. Mm-hmm. And but can you just explain kind of what that means? Because it's people hear the word, but they think maybe you just put clothes on celebrities, but it's a bit more than that.
Yeah, what I love about styling is that it means something different every time. And of course, I'm a freelance stylist, so that means that there's a lot of variety in my work. So sometimes that means, as you said, I'm putting clothing on celebrities. It can mean that I'm working with artists or celebrities to sort of express their, creative self. It can also mean that I work with brands in the context of advertising, and I work together, with them to display the items that they want to sell, and effectively to create seductive imagery. And then it can also mean, and one of my favorite sort of contexts in which to style is the editorial context. This is an example of my editorial work. That's where, often I get to be the most creative. I also love the opportunity to collaborate directly with designers, to take a designer's collection and to translate that to different platforms, notably, to the runway. And there's some examples of my creative direction in the context of runway later in the presentation.
Right, and you've even styled jewelry for the runway, and there's a slide about that, which I find really, it's difficult. That's a challenging thing to do.
Yes, I'm really proud of that example that we'll eventually see for the runway of Fashion Art Toronto quite recently last week, actually on Mother's Day. I had the pleasure of collaborating with jewelry designer Sanaz Doost, and the challenge presented there was making her fine jewelry visible to the audience on a runway. So the direction that I chose there was to eliminate all of the other details on each model by putting each model in what's called a morph suit, which is sort of not unlike a green screen suit or full body suit. And so each model wore a morph suit, and that helped to really, it's something I chose to help Sanaz's. Here's the example here on the screen. It's an example of where my creativity is in direct support of somebody else's vision. And so I love the challenge of lifting up designers, and I love the unique challenges presented by each context or each styling opportunity. I'm especially proud of that tummy on the runway on Mother's Day.
Very nice. Okay, and could we have the next slide, please? So tell us a little bit about your work with Fashion Art Toronto and your kind of advocacy work that led into Fashion Takes Action, which is a really important agency.
I have been a huge fan and supporter of Fashion Art Toronto for so many years. I am so deeply proud of Vanya Vasic and her organization and the platform that she has consistently provided to designers, including myself. I definitely have participated in FAT as a stylist, supporting various designers, but it's also the only fashion week that I have personally shown my own work at. And that's partly because of the controversial nature of my work at times, or my desire to sort of communicate difficult truths about the industry. And Vanya and Fashion Art Toronto have given me a place to do that.
Okay.
This is an example of a runway presentation that we did showcasing designers who are committed to upcycling existing garments. And this happened during the pandemic. And I think it's such a great example of Fashion Art Toronto's agility in adapting runway presentations for remote viewing. And I'm just so proud. I'm especially proud of this.
Can you just tell us where they are?
Yeah, we're at the Valley Village sorting and recycling facility in Etobicoke, which presented so many interesting opportunities and locations within the one location. So we have bound bales. You can see here bound bales of of clothing and, various sort of racks for, moving these bales. And it was an absolute wonderland and a really appropriate sort of context to showcase what can ultimately be done from existing and not new materials.
Right, and this is kind of the tip of the iceberg in our overproduction
Yes.
of fashion, and just one center in Toronto from one pretty much privately owned enterprise. Value Village isn't so much a charity organization. Thank you. We have the next slide, please. And now tell us about Fashion Takes Action, which is really, really important. I think lots of people need to know more about about other similar agencies, and certainly this one in Canada, because it's really been a leader, and it's like we all need to start thinking very seriously about what we're wearing, what we're buying, where it's coming from, and what happens to it when we no longer want it. And maybe we shouldn't have had it in the first place, but that, like, we really need to think a lot more deeply about fashion.
Yes, these are two organizations that I've worked very closely with. I would say more so Fashion Takes Action, which was founded in 2007. And as you mentioned before, it's Canada's only NGO that aims to advance sustainability throughout the entire fashion system. And they do that by through education, awareness, research, and collaboration. And I served as creative director and board member of FTA, since 2007. And meeting Kelly Drennan, FTA's founder, was a really important moment for me in my career. And together we saw FTA through the early years, in which it took various sort of incarnations, hosting various events, and eventually sort of committing to the creation of the World Ethical Apparel Roundtable, an event called Design Forward, which we held as a design showcase and a design competition. And then, of course, My Clothes, My World, which is a really important school program that provides children of all ages with an introduction and overview about fashion's social and environmental impacts. So absolutely follow Fashion Takes Action. You can learn so much from their Instagram alone, let alone the other programming that is offered. So I really can't say enough about FTA and the conversations that FTA has tried to have, especially in a pre-Rana Plaza world. It was the Rana Plaza collapse that well, definitely for worse, opened the world up to the urgency of fashion's impacts, and specifically what I feel the elephant in the room of sustainable fashion is, which is labor rights. We're definitely, as an industry, we're more comfortable with conversations surrounding sustainable textiles and even environmental impacts. When definitely taking care of the people in your supply chain it is maybe more important.
I mean, it's interesting. I was talking to a colleague who's worked in the industry for years as a pattern maker, and she was saying how in Canada we used to have a lot, the talk now post-COVID to bring industry home and to make everything more local, to bust out the supply chain and actually make sure that we can do it as well as for sustainable reasons. But that the actual labor skills have been lost a lot because things went offshore so much, and that we've, locally we've lost a lot of that. So there's so much we have to relearn, particularly in the global north, I think. And if we could just go, and we'll come back to the Indigenous in a minute. So these are the 7 R's, we're up to 7 now, of Fashion Takes Action and a lot of these agencies. Can you just go over them a little bit for us?
Mm-hmm. It's important to acknowledge that in the garment life cycle, the area that has the most substantial impact actually happens after consumers buy our clothes. So thinking about what we can do, which isn't to say that change doesn't need to come from the top down and from the brands as well, but thinking about how we use and care for and dispose of our clothing is something that we as individuals can do to reduce our impact. To your point about global manufacturing, I think that when we as individuals reclaim the skills to mend and make and repair our clothing, we develop a bigger respect for what actually goes into making our clothes. So beyond, reduce, reuse, recycle, we have repurpose and repair. This means developing a relationship with your local tailor, visiting your local jewelry repair shop, and fixing the thing that has fixing the necklace that has a missing stone in it, etc. Resale is an important one. Lots and lots of fast fashion brands this is evidence. The importance of resale is evidenced in more and more fast fashion brands getting into the resale space. And this can also mean that it's important, when we're done with our clothing, when we're sick of it, when we're not wearing it, it's important to stream our clothing properly. So that can mean, taking garments to a place like Value Village, but also other consignment shops, swapping, etc. Renting is an important choice, especially for formal wear. We wear our dress up clothing so infrequently that it really makes sense to rent clothing in that context. And then, of course, recycling. And that can mean taking our solo socks and our ratty t-shirts to be recycled at a place like Value Village, who are investing in sort of fiber separation technologies. But it can also mean things like repurposing existing garments and turning them into something else.
Right, and maybe your socks don't have to match all the time too.
Yes, overrated.
One always goes missing. But I also think it's important to note that we can't recycle our way out of this problem at the moment of too much production, overproduction, the use of oil in a lot of polyesters, this very complex mix that textiles are made of different fibers and things. So they're really hard, if not impossible, to break down and recycle, because there's so much weird stuff in it that we don't even know. A
major trend in sustainable fashion right now is the use of recycled polyester, that was once a pop bottle. And from a material health perspective, it's really not safe. Microfiber pollution from washing polyester is a huge pollution issue and an ocean pollution issue. And essentially what recycled polyester does is just change the shape of garbage. But we are using as fabric, something that was never intended to be used that way, and we're putting it against our skin, and we're moving it, and we're washing it, and consequently all of these tiny particles are dispersing into the environment, and it's an absolute plastic catastrophe.
Yeah, and there's a lot of agencies that are working on this problem of ocean waste, and actually interesting bathing suit companies that are trying to recycle and use this stuff. But this is one of the problems when you start talking about sustainability, is the problems are so profound and they're so complex and they're so intertwined. So this very simple action of everybody taking charge of their own wardrobe, from purchase to its incineration or whatever, getting rid of it, however you do it, and to think about it in the long term when you're shopping, that it's not just now and you can look fabulous at the party, but it's actually a responsibility. And are you going to wear it like, you have something already that's maybe better? I don't know.
Shopping, the concept of shopping your own closet is important.
And swaps are great too, you know. Yeah, swaps are really good. Okay, lovely. Can we have next slide, please? And just keep me going. And here you talked about the Indigenous group that you're involved in, and there's something happening very soon at Harbourfront too with this.
Yeah, Indigenous Fashion Art is an organization that I've supported as industry liaison, and that event is a must-attend event, and it's coming up, like you said, I believe from the 9th to the 12th of June. This slide here just represents, it's just an example of some of my writing work in addition to styling. Definitely I take the opportunity to write, especially when I feel very impassioned about the cause, as I did in this case. This is famed artist Kent Monkman dressed as his alter ego, Mischief Eagle Testicle, in his performance art marriage ceremony to iconic fashion designer Jean-Paul Gaultier. And I learned about this performance art stunt at Indigenous Fashion Week and was disappointed that the sort of global fashion media hadn't sort of talked about this or written about this. So I chose to, and that was because a museum in Montreal held a retrospective of Jean-Paul Gaultier's work and included, without the appropriate context, this headdress that Mischief Eagle Testicle is wearing. And there was huge backlash. So the museum chose to engage Kent Monkman and asked him what would Mischief do to make amends, to turn this opportunity into an educational one, to approach it with humor and with love, constructively. And so this is just an example of how I guess I try to do what I can to shine a light and bring examples, bring the work of others into the forefront.
Mm-hmm. No, it's fantastic. And of course, it's a marriage made in heaven between Gaultier and Mischief, and Gaultier would be, the first person to embrace this kind of acknowledgement and understanding. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And can we move on with the slides, please? And so, with Fashion Takes Action, one of the important things for me is that there's another agency called Fashion Revolution, which gets probably a high profile, I might say, than Fashion Takes Action, because they have people like Vivienne Westwood as part of it. And but that was founded at this moment, right, with the Rana Plaza disaster, and Fashion Takes Action was before that. But then you had the opportunity, if that's the word, to actually go to Rana Plaza, which I find absolutely incredible. So we'd love to hear from you about that.
Yeah, I have had the privilege in my career to really follow my curiosity and to sort of investigate and participate and interact with fashion in lots of different ways. So I did visit Rana Plaza as a part of an initiative that is no longer.
The Rana Plaza was the largest industrial
structural failure. It was a factory building in Bangladesh that had several stories of garment manufacturing, and there were workers that reported cracks in the structure. They expressed concern. They were bribed back to work in bound and forced labor contexts, and the factory collapsed on top of them. And it is a moment that the world really woke up. It marked the inception of Fashion Revolution Day, Fashion Revolution Week, and the organization we know as Fashion Revolution. And I did make my way all the way there to speak with survivors and to attempt to communicate their stories and understand. This happened in April of 2013. I was there in November of 2014. And I haven't included here very many photos featuring individuals who were mourning and grieving, some of whom came every day, just because I'm sensitive about the exploitative nature or the potentially exploitative nature of that. But there were many people. This was probably, quite early in the morning, but there were many people that visited this space, like I said, daily, and many people who wanted to line up and tell me their stories of who they'd lost and what that loss has subsequently meant in their lives.
And of course, this was a galvanizing moment. for a lot of people and for a lot of industry, but there's still a lot of work to do, because people have to sign on to these various different initiatives. And you know, America's trying to make one now, Europe's trying to do things, and Canada needs to do a lot more, I think. And it's so while Rana Plaza is this kind of tipping point, it hasn't tipped enough, I think, because you know, people go to sleep and you forget, and things go on, but it's just the tip of the iceberg of what happens.
Yeah, and we still are more comfortable with conversations about recycled polyester and organic cotton than we are about standing up for and insisting on living wages, on-site childcare, safe working conditions, you know, longer contracts, because that's also part of sustainability. You know, the sort of industry practice of pitting different manufacturers against each other who subsequently undercut urgently needs to be replaced by, you know, longer and more meaningful relationships between brands and their manufacturers.
Right, and we know it can be done even with big brands, because a few of them are doing it, and doing it successfully. And success meaning making more money, which is another issue. How much money do we need, is how much clothes do we need? But your work in advocacy, in supporting industry in terms of styling, but also in terms of print material, and also other things you've done, which we'll talk about in a minute, with film, and really trying to get to the bottom of things. So this idea of working on post-consumer, there's also other good things, like there's a few apps now, Good On You being one, and oh gosh, you mentioned another one about makeup.
Yes, that absolutely. There's another app that maybe we'll talk about later in conjunction with the film, that can help you with the overwhelming sort of, you know, marketplace, and wading through all of these sort of misinformation to ultimately, you know, figure out what is safe to buy.
Right. So all of these discussions about where things come from, accountability, sustainability, and really people are using the sustainable word very freely, as you said, a lot of the fast fashion lines, but really they should make less, or, you know, that would be much more sustainable than reusing their polyester products, which can't biodegrade.
Yes. This is an example of me reusing a polyester product. This is a duvet that I purchased at Valley Village, along with some curtains that I turned into pants. And this is what I wore to the Canadian Art and Fashion Awards in 2019.
Where you got an award?
Where I was nominated for an award.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so this is really fabulous. So, I mean, this could be fun. Sustainability doesn't just have to be like a sad event of waiting.
Yeah, thanks for
stuff. Like, it can really be you know, a chance to kind of, you know, have a lot of fun and work things out. So let's talk about your work with well, here with dry cleaning, this idea of well, more things going into the environment.
Yeah. Something that I didn't mention at the beginning was a diagnosis that I received in 2002, 2003 of celiac disease. And that sort of marked the beginning of my obsession with reading food labels, which eventually extended to, you know, an obsession with reading all kinds of product labels, and an awareness that what we eat is, you know, becomes who we are, and also what we apply becomes who we are. So as a result of, I have suffered chemical overexposure in my life through my life as a competitive swimmer, by attempting to treat my acne with oral and topical pharmaceuticals, really harsh drugs. And of course, my enthusiastic use of all manner of personal care products. That collectively, those exposures collectively have resulted in something called multiple chemical sensitivity. So I suffer quite severely from MCS. I have an extreme fragrance sensitivity. And, not unlike, others in this space, getting sick is sort of what motivated me to connect with one of my favorite Canadian organizations, which is Environmental Defense. And that happened through a fellow green beauty pioneer, my dear friend, Donna Bishop. And so at the time of the Just Beautiful campaign, which was the first sort of campaign that I supported, Dr. Rick Smith was at the helm of Environmental Defense, and he is an accomplished author. And these are two important books. I guess, are they in reverse for you? I'm sorry. So Slow Death by Rubber Duck and Talks In, Talks Out are examples, are great books that I recommend, and examples where Dr. Rick himself overexposed himself, sort of like the documentary film Super Size Me.
Let's talk about your film, because we're running out of time here, and this is really important. And you work
That's how it began.
Be recognized. So
yep, the work of Dr. Rick Smith is sort of what began, and it really was the inspiration for what eventually became Toxic Beauty. I'm really proud of that effort. I'm really proud of the team. I'm proud and sort of surprised even that we were nominated for an international Emmy. And it really was a labor of love that, like I said, started because I got sick. So you can watch, could we have the next slide just to click through?
Just keep the slides going, please, Aaron. Yeah, so this is really scary.
Here's the movie poster, and you'll be able to look for this to watch. The easiest way to watch Toxic Beauty is on CBC Gem for our Canadian followers, but it's also available on most other platforms. And yeah.
Tell us briefly just what it's about and what the issues are there.
Well, the film largely follows the class action, the Johnson & Johnson talc class action, and that is largely for legal reasons. But I'm really proud of the science in this film, of the experts in this film who have been working, tirelessly to communicate and substantiate the health impacts that result from chronic, sometimes low dose exposure to conventional cosmetic ingredients, common cosmetic ingredients.
What the film shows is that all these cosmetics and all these things, the way the law is set up is that they can put the products out, and then and then they're sort of testing after if people sort of say it might have something wrong with it. So it's the inverse of what you would expect government to protect us. Is that corporations are being protected by being able to put whatever they want on the market, coming from whatever sources, and talc, as in talcum powder, which is the focus of this film, is pretty horrific. And so it is astonishing when you see this film, because everything seems backwards.
Yes, I think the hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around is that the products on store shelves have not been safety tested. No safety data is required by the Canadian government and the American government, but by the Canadian government in advance of sending a product to market. It's just sort of baffling when you let in that reality. Canada's cosmetics are regulated in a post-market system. So like you said, incidents, adverse reactions and incidents and illnesses are eventually reported to Health Canada, and on their discretion, they eventually let those incidents accumulate before sort of going back to the brand and attempting to initiate a recall, which rarely happens.
There's a very interesting comment by one of the scientists, I think one of the leading doctors in the video, talking about this debate. It's like, people who are scientists, like, they prove stuff. It's not that it's right or it's wrong, it's that this is what happens. And then in an intellectual environment or in a court environment, it's like there's all of a sudden all these gray areas. So the questioning of science, which is something that is a proven fact because it's scientific, then sort of moves into this crazy world where it's kind of up for debate, which is an opinion.
Yes.
And what you're going to do with that information is different, but the fact is the fact. And
yes, it's a conventional principle of toxicology that the dose of an ingredient determines whether it's poisonous or not. So the industry as a whole sort of hides behind that conventional principle of toxicology and doesn't want to acknowledge cumulative exposure. We are not using individual personal care products. We are using multiple personal care products in conjunction throughout the day, throughout our lives. So collectively, that impact is having a severe consequences hormonally for people, but also for the environment, because ultimately this stuff washes down the drain and it often can't be filtered out through water treatment.
Right. And then, Erin, if you can move the slides along, and then also the products that it's made of, where it comes from, which may be mined in some cases and may be mined from ocean. So this is an organization you started, and I think it's really amazing. And there's graphics too. So can you just tell us a little bit about this before we go to the Q&A?
Sure. One of the many gaps in cosmetic regulations is the non-disclosure of ingredient source. So any individual ingredient can have many potential sources. So regardless of what that source is, an ingredient can have the same name. And a best worst example of that is an ingredient called squalene, which is the focus of my work with All Earthlings. Squalene is a moisturizing ingredient that can come from various plant sources. It can be compounded biosynthetically, but still the cheapest way to source this ingredient is from the livers of sharks. So one of the problems with the legislation is that there's no legally binding definitions of marketing terms, and that includes, hypoallergenic, organic, natural, but also vegan and cruelty-free. There's no legally binding definitions of those words. So it's important for people to understand that not only do consumers lack the information needed to avoid chemicals of concern that have adverse health impacts and adverse environmental health impacts, consumers also have no way of reliably avoiding ingredients of animal origin, or in this case, ingredients of endangered animal origin, like shark squalene.
Right, it is absolutely astonishing. And now I'm going to open up the Q&A. And so someone, it's actually Donna Bishop, is asking about so many sustainable brands, champion materials from recycled bottles and all these things we were talking about. Are these better than conventional ones? Is the answer that we should avoid doing anything plastic or recycled? And are there preferred sneaker brand suggestions for that? I'd say go on Good On You app and read what they have to say. But this idea, this is the confusing part as soon as you start delving into this conversation, is you get paralyzed.
It's my personal feeling, because of my chemical sensitivities and things, that there's maybe a better place for recycled plastics than next to our skin in the form of textiles and clothing. I think that things like sidewalks or insulation or other sort of industrial uses, I mean, yes, we have to sort of make use of existing materials. I just don't know. It's not my area of expertise, but I just don't know that fashion, and specifically yoga apparel, there's an athletic apparel, athleisure. I don't think it's the best place for recycled plastic.
Well, it's an issue, this whole thing, sort of road we're going on now in having kind of messed things up and trying to find a new direction is an experiment. So there's many companies that are trying to do better, to work out things. And as we said, it's a very complicated, long chain of supplies, from social justice to how things are shipped and definitely how we wear them. So it is a bit of work to keep on top of things, but there are good initiatives and there are interesting apps and ways of finding out about things. Reuse, recycle, the R's can help with consumption, but what's the best route to determine where and how products are made? Labeling is not so fulsome, and sales staff probably don't know if you even go into a shop anymore. So transparency, greenwashing issues, really.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. We are in the thick of that. And I think that I would encourage you not to underestimate the value of asking questions, the value of taking to social media and doing what you can to ask the important questions about where our clothing is coming from, who it's made, who's making it, and encourage, if not demand, that transparency on behalf of brands. And however often you can, ensure that you're buying from brands who are disclosing their supply chains and participating in things like the Fashion Transparency Index, Fashion Revolution's Transparency Index,
which is online, and you can see that, as well as the signed on to UN initiatives and various things like that, and to push them to do so. So yes, you have a lot of power as a consumer. They want you to buy their product, so they have to pony up to meet your expectations. A question: how would you recommend students to divert things, textiles from garbage? And another one: how do we balance acknowledging, calling out greenwashing from big brands and encourage big brands to adopt more sustainable practices? I mean, these are really embedded issues.
They are. To address the student question, one of my favorite things has always and will always be thrifting. I think that it's important, that may remain an accessible option for people. There's a criticism that sustainable or ethical fashion, it costs more money and it's prohibitive for people. Thrift is the sort of is my answer to that often, and getting together with your friends and sharing pieces, renting pieces, swapping pieces, and taking that power back, and as often as possible not consuming, just not participating in consumption at all.
There's another app about how many wears you have on things. So if you actually think about that, or go through your closet and think,
it's become a revolutionary act to wear our clothing more than once, to be photographed in our clothing more than once. That's where we're at. So I challenge you to take to the internet and take to the streets, wear your clothing more than once.
Yeah, and historically people have worn their clothing a lot more than once, and for many generations, because it was so valuable, and there was a respect for fiber and how things were made, and the cost they had a value that we've lost. How things are produced. A question, I'll leave this to you if you want to answer it: what cosmetics do you wear?
That is a great question. Off the top, I will say that it's really hard for me to give brand recommendations, because I'm in the business of sending cosmetic samples to the lab and reverse engineering them. That said, I have a lot of respect for the Detox Market, which is a retailer that really invests a lot of time and energy in scrutinizing ingredient integrity. I really love RMS. I'm wearing a bit of RMS right now. The Detox Market, I will shout out again, because they also have a goal of addressing another elephant in the room of beauty sustainability, which is the beauty industry's exorbitant single-use plastic problem. So they have a goal of eliminating plastic and transitioning their brands to glass and other sort of packaging materials. What else do I wear? You know what? I've replaced an extensive beauty regime, largely with household, pantry items that include diluted apple cider vinegar, sugar, baking soda, and these types of things. And this after applying all manner of things to my skin over the years, there's a lot that can be
What
done.
your pioneer grandmother or
Yes.
grandmother wore, like they know, like this is, you know, we need to recapture this information that's in old manuals of how to look after households and etiquette books and stuff like that. As
I wash my face with a good quality oil, like jojoba oil, or, you know, any type of oil. There's reducing our overall product dependency is important. We're being sort of made to believe that we require this 8-step personal care, you know, system. It's really not the case. And in my life, I've come to respect the skin's natural microbiome, and make an effort not to overstrip and overwash and sterilize. It's important to understand that from a design perspective, makeup and personal care products are designed to be shelf stable. They're designed to perform in the short term. They're not designed to be safe. So reducing overall product dependency is something that I encourage. And beyond that, looking for brands that don't contain the dirty dozen, which is a group of 12 priority chemicals that that should be removed from our personal care products. And you can look to the David Suzuki Foundation. I believe they go by the Toxic 10, as well as Environmental Defense for those top ingredients to avoid. And beyond that, a really important app that I love is called Think Dirty. And it allows you to scan and search the products that you're using. And it gives you a toxicity ranking 1 to 10 and provides safer alternatives within the same product category.
Wow. So there you go, everyone. Be careful and do your homework. It's pretty astonishing.
It is.
It's not general knowledge, really. I mean, it really is amazing. A question: what are your thoughts on the fact that the sustainable fashion industry is growing, therefore still producing more clothing? I don't know if that's a sustainable fashion industry, but on one hand, it's good to see more companies in this space. But do we really need more sustainable brands making more things?
I would say overall, it's encouraging. You know, we're not at a perfect place, but it's encouraging. And a lot of times it is the efforts of individual, independent, local brands that are putting the heat on bigger brands. So I'm really proud of that and try to support. I'm wearing several Canadian independent designers today. I try to do that as often as I can whenever I dress up, which is more and more infrequently. But yeah, I would say that it's a good sign in that more and more people are participating in the conversation and awareness is growing. But nonetheless, whether it's sustainable or not, there are precious resources that go into the creation of any item or garment or, you know, product, and that needs to be respected. And don't consume it if you don't need it, and make it last when you do consume it.
Mm-hmm. So one of the problems that I encountered with my teaching and with the students was this big discussion about greenwashing, and because having some kind of sustainable part of your brand is becoming a marketing necessity. So a lot of people are doing this, but the greenwashing of what this really means and the accountability of that is completely varied and sometimes completely non-transparent. So, I mean, I think transparency and legislation are the things we really need to agitate for, and certainly I mean I wish government would do a lot less. I mean, sorry, a lot more in terms of they're doing a lot less than they could be doing in terms of regulating this and demanding this, and certainly everything you've just said about the toxicity of you know, beauty care products, where it's it's too late, they're on the shelf now.
Yep, I think we have to sort of balance that agitation and that drive to push forward with the understanding and acceptance that sustainability is a spectrum, that, you know, it's not something that can be achieved 100%. It can mean different things. it's a word that it's an imperfect word that we use to refer to social and environmental and even cultural, impacts of clothing. So, it is important to brands. I do a bit of consulting work, and it's important for brands to start where they're at and set targets and, progressively improve.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier for new brands to start out on that foot than it is for bigger brands to kind of.
Yeah, I would say that generally sustainability is best considered, ahead of time. And a lot of the sort of solutions that we look to right now are really sort of retrofits to a really broken system. So it's very hard to think of sustainability after the fact, and recycling and the realities about how little of our food waste and things are actually recycled is evidence of that. We need to think about new systems and preventing plastic waste, not just changing the shape of plastic waste.
Yes, and there are some really wonderful things that are happening as well, in terms of using mushrooms and seaweed and all kinds of new ways of growing leather or vegan leather, whatever you want to call it. It's actually a completely new product. So we're not there yet either, and we're never there, whatever there is. But there are some really amazing things that are happening, which is really interesting. And some of it's also going back to really old products like peanut cloth and fibers that indigenous people have used around the world and understand better than we do. So
I'm passionate about that message. Lifting up indigenous voices is absolutely what each of us needs to be doing. And that you also touched on another sort of important solution and opportunity that the fashion industry has and that creative people have, which is the contribution of beautiful, creative, original solutions to really dark and challenging problems. And in that sense, I think fashion and fashion people can really make a change and sort of develop solutions that become examples in other industries.
I agree, absolutely. So one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. What might you tell your 10-year-old self with regards to approaching fashion? Great question.
Oh my gosh. That fashion is a privilege, and that fashion is a human right, that fashion is possible for everyone, and to not think about it too much. Because for me in my life, as much as it matters and as much as I love the transformation of that is possible through clothing, there are things that matter on this planet much more.